The next Megaton Nintendo Switch 2 Direct could be happening sooner than you think. Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we have much to discuss about this potential Nintendo Direct. It looks like, at least according to this rumor here, we may be seeing this presentation sooner than what a lot of people have been thinking, myself included. But this gets more interesting when you also consider a variety of different happenings as of late. They could be giving us some clues as to what sort of Megaton announcements Nintendo might be saving for this next big Direct, showing us more about the next wave of huge Nintendo games. But before going forward, let me take a moment to point out that I am now aiming for a new goal of 60,000 subscribers. So if you find yourself enjoying my content, your subscription would be appreciated. So this rumor about the next Nintendo Direct is coming from Pedro Enrique Lutelipe from his channel. He was doing a live stream, he speaks in Portuguese, but here we have Universal Nintendo that has translated the information, and basically what's going on here is that PH Brazil, his internet alias, has said that from what he has heard, the next Switch 2 Direct will be happening either in the launch week of Switch 2 or the week afterwards. He does not know what kinds of announcements will be there though. And I find this information to be interesting, because this would be kind of a weird thing, I would say. With the Switch 2 launching on June 5th, would you really want to have the Direct in the same week? Especially because immediately after the launch on June 5th, June 6th is Summer Games Fest. It begins, and all throughout the weekend and such we'll be getting a variety of big announcements. Does Nintendo really want to put out a Direct during that period of time? I would think that they would be more focused on all the promotional and marketing material, getting out a few more smaller updates on the Nintendo Today app, allowing journalists and critics to say what they need to say about the Switch 2 and its games. I understand that there may not be final reviews ready day one, but at least previews and such, and a lot of coverage along those lines. So, to me, it almost feels like it would be kind of a bad idea to have a Direct during this week. Especially because there's going to be a whole bunch of other announcements, a lot of which will have to do with Switch 2 during Summer Games Fest. However, the week afterwards might work. After all these different things, once the dust is starting to settle, they can keep us engaged with a whole bunch of announcements about a variety of other things. But I will say that if they want to have a Direct right before the launch of Switch 2 in this week, the first few days of June, as weird as it might be, if there's something else they want to say about Mario Kart World, or perhaps wanting to put out another spotlight presentation of these different third-party games involved on day one for Switch 2, having a Direct might be a good way to showcase that. But ultimately, I find myself skeptical of this happening. The week after is more believable to me, but even then, I'm a little skeptical. One, because while I do totally acknowledge that PH Brazil absolutely has inside sources and is a good journalist, if this ends up not being true, this would not be the first time. When it comes to reporting on things that have been heard behind the scenes, they're subject to change, and there's room for conflation and such. So I think there's plenty of reason to be skeptical, especially when we consider the history of recent Nintendo Directs happening in June. So looking over the last 3 years, the June Direct last year, 2024, happened on June 18th, the second half of the month, not in the first 2 weeks. In 2023, June 21st, even later into the month. And then going back to 2022, we didn't have a normal big general Direct, but what we had instead was a partner at the very end of the month, June 28th, and a Xenoblade Chronicles 3 dedicated Direct on June 22nd. This was their offerings for summer presentations. And then before that, we had E3 presentations. E3 is no longer a thing. And so during the E3 periods when Nintendo's beholden to that E3 scheduling, yeah, we would have Nintendo Directs at the very beginning of June because that's when E3 was taking place. But that's no longer a thing. Now it's Summer Games Fest, and now Nintendo, as we've seen over the last 3 years when there hasn't been an E3, they're doing their presentations later into June. So, with this history in mind, I think it's more reason to be skeptical of a big Direct happening in the launch week of Switch 2, or even in the week afterwards, although I do find that option to be a lot more plausible. And we should also take into consideration that we just got 3 Direct presentations in close, quick succession. At the end of March, the big April Switch 2 Direct, and then a Mario Kart World Direct just a couple weeks afterwards. So to then have another Direct, a big Direct, in the beginning of June, It just seems like a lot to expect. But maybe the thinking here is that Nintendo wants to continually put out a lot of information during this year because it is the launch year of Switch 2. So this idea of having more densely packed waves of information, things happening in quick succession, that may be a big part of the plan. This isn't like prior years where Nintendo has been in the waning phases of their generation where they need to spread out the information and be more tactical to keep people engaged. Now, there's so much going on to really push the beginning of a generation, they need to think of a strategy to fully capitalize on all the momentum and get people as informed as possible. So there may be a different approach here from Nintendo given the circumstances. And so I'm not going to rule out this possibility of a big direct happening a week or two earlier than expected. But what might we see in this presentation? There have been some different things happening as of late that seem to be giving people different ideas. Now, of course, here's the obvious. We should be getting more information on Donkey Kong Bonanza, we should be getting more information on Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, Dragon Drive, Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, different third-party games, perhaps even including the Duskbloods, even though that's coming out next year, Kirby Air Riders, all the games that are already known that are coming out after the launch of Switch 2, it makes sense for us to get updates on those games. But also, like most directs, there's not just going to be updates on currently known games, but announcements on new things as well. And considering what's been announced this year so far from Nintendo, I think there's plenty of reason to expect even more. I think we need at least one more big holiday release. If you look at the holiday period, maybe we get Metroid Prime 4 and Legends EA, which would be great, but those are Switch 2 edition games, meaning that there's also Switch 1 versions. I think there needs to be at least one more big exclusive during the holiday period or close to that period of time directly from Nintendo. Now, a lot of you may have heard my theories about a Luigi's Mansion 4. Next Level Games, the developer of Luigi's Mansion, they put out a game every 3 years very consistently. In this year, 2025 would be due for another. They've also started putting out hirings for a next project just a few months ago, which may suggest that this pattern of release is holding true. We are also approaching Mario's 40th anniversary, and so there may be a boost in different Mario Universe games and sales, and we also have the Mario movie early next year. A Luigi's Mansion game may be quite fitting during this period of time, and Luigi's Mansion 3 was the best-selling game the Next Level Games ever produced, and so following that up with Luigi's Mansion 4 to start the generation might be a really good idea. But that is just a theory. There are other possibilities. Sure, maybe it's not even just one big surprise, but more. That could be. And I also think that it wouldn't just be about announcing things for this year, but also for next year as well. So there's a lot of room for some exciting Nintendo announcements to happen in this presentation. But something I want to speak on here to perhaps temper expectations a little bit is all this talk about another Zelda release in 2025. Now, this talk is stemming from a recent leak of Nintendo of Italy promotional materials. I won't be sharing any imagery here, but from what I gather, nothing too substantial got out there. However, there was this one slide that shows what I would say is a proof of concept in terms of how they might be demoing Switch 2 stations, where on one side, you see Mario Odyssey being played, and on the other, you see something that says Zelda 2025. Now, this something is just a key art of Echoes of Wisdom that's been blurred or what have you, and then you see Zelda 2025 overlaid. This is just conceptual imagery here. These are slides that are meant for internal Nintendo use. They're probably just talking about and planning how they're going to go about promoting the Switch 2. I don't think this is at all any sort of indicator that there will be another Zelda release in this year of 2025. And when you think about it, we're really getting a lot of Zelda stuff. So Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom Switch 2 editions are coming out day one. Wind Waker on the GameCube app for Switch 2 is coming out day one. We're also getting free updates for Echoes of Wisdom and Link's Awakening, so these games are going to look and run a little bit better on Switch 2 day one. That's a lot of Zelda day one. And then on top of that, we have the spin-off, Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, due for this winter. Now, I will mention that when it comes to Age of Imprisonment, when Nintendo went through their recent financial results briefing and put out their explanatory material, for the first few hours it was out, they had it listed as winter 2025, but immediately changed it to just this winter. So there might be a possibility that this game is indeed coming out winter 2025, in other words, December of this year. But given that they've changed it back to this winter, and that's what they initially said with the first trailer, I'm going to simply assume that they're aiming for winter, which can also mean the beginning months of next year. Either way, though, that's another Zelda thing that's coming out pretty soon. So I think we should probably temper expectations with expecting another Zelda release for this year. Something else I'd like to mention, though, because I fear that there may have been some conflation here. There has been a rumor that we've already touched on that's giving us an update about the long-theorized Ocarina of Time remake for Switch 2. This rumor has come from Nashville during a podcast, Attack the Backlog, a friend of the channel. So you can check that out, it will be linked in the description below. It's a wonderful watch. But Nashville talked about how he had heard that a year and a half ago, the Ocarina of Time remake project was going through some sort of visual redesign. Now, to me, that suggests that we're going to have to wait a little bit longer for this release. Given that it's a remake, I think maybe we can still have some optimism that it won't take that much longer, but if they are going through this work to do a visual redesign of this remake, it might also imply it's going to be a bit more ambitious, and regardless, this is something that feels like it makes more sense for Zelda's 40th anniversary next year in 2026 as we approach the release for the Zelda movie in early 2027. So I point this all out so people don't get confused. This whole Zelda 2025 thing I think is a bunch of, well, nothing basically. This whole rumor about Ocarina of Time remake I think may mean something, and even if the rumor means nothing, I still think it makes a lot of sense for Ocarina of Time remake to be happening because we've been theorizing this well before any rumors. As I've talked about in various videos, there seems like there's a lot of evidence pointing towards another big Zelda remake in the early parts of the Switch 2 generation, especially when we take into consideration the different interviews from Eiji Aonuma. That said though, if this remake has a chance to show up in the year of 2026, and if it is going to be a bigger deal than just a simple one, if Nintendo is going a bit bigger here with this game, that may even include some gameplay changes and such where the game's a bit more expansive and there's a bit more to it. Maybe it's the kind of game Nintendo would want to tease and announce further in advance. Perhaps Nintendo will want to put out some sort of big Zelda thing to excite the Zelda fanbase to get them more eager to buy the Switch 2 early on. Especially with this big direct coming out in the month of the launch of Switch 2, whatever week Nintendo ultimately decides to put it out in. If you want to really get people invested in buying the console, maybe announcing some exciting projects to come later down the road might be a really good idea, because perhaps what's been shown so far isn't enough to sell some people. But if you show off a big, bold, ambitious remake, or perhaps even slightly reimagined Ocarina of Time remake, that could go a long ways towards inspiring a whole bunch of people. And maybe it wouldn't be Ocarina of Time remake that they teased during this presentation for some sort of big thing that's down the horizon, but something else made by another EPD team. Which brings me to another bit of interesting news that happened this week that I think we should consider here. And I'm going to point this out because I think it should be clarified here. IGN put out another post on Twitter that, well, is just wrong. They are saying that the development for Mario Kart World started 5 years ago, as you see here. And fortunately, we were able to get a community note on this very early on, so hopefully not too many people were misled. But the actual truth is that, according to the team, literally they just, I don't know why they missed this, but when you go and you read the very beginning of the interview, as you see me scrolling here, I didn't have to scroll very far, Yabuki, we were thinking about what to do for the next Mario Kart game even during the development of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and we began prototyping in March 2017. It was at the end of that year when we officially started work on it as a project. So here, in the very first part of the Ask Developer interview for Mario Kart World, they tell us that development started for this game in 2017. What it seems like where there may have been some confusion is that unfortunately some people only chose to read just like the excerpt that was shared by other people from part 2, where Sato says, Yabuki-san first brought it up around 2020. Back then we already had an idea of the next system's expected specs, but it wasn't until a bit later that we actually received working development in units. Until then, we just had to proceed with development based on provisional estimates. This is talking about how in 2020 they started thinking that they should transition over to Switch 2 as opposed to making the game for Switch 1. And so Mario Kart World has been in development throughout the entire Switch era. I think this is important to talk about here, because no way has the Mario Kart team been only working on Mario Kart World the last 8 years. I think what this tells us is that, very similar to Pikmin 4, they have been developing this game for a long time, but as things progressed, they had to make some shifts and adjustments and move things back and focus on other projects in the meanwhile. Basically, what I'm getting at here is that there should be another game that is fairly far into development that this team could put out relatively early into Switch 2's life cycle. I'm not saying it comes out this year, maybe it doesn't even come out next year, but it could, and Nintendo could decide to announce whatever this project might be in this upcoming June. And whatever that is could be a huge game. This is one of Nintendo's biggest, best developers. They could have put something together here that would be absolutely fantastic, something that might even be just as exciting as a Mario Kart World. Now, for some extra context, another project that this team has worked on was ARMS. That was the last game they made before Mario Kart World, at least in full. So I guess we'll see whatever that is whenever Nintendo decides to announce it. But I think it's interesting that we see that Mario Kart World did start off as a Switch 1 project, and that it has been in development for all these years, because it gets me thinking about another project that's coming out fairly soon, Donkey Kong Bonanza, where we've also been theorizing that they've been working on this game for many years. Let me point out this rumor from May 11th of 2021. Lonely Goomba on Twitter said this: I heard an unlikely rumor that the Mario Odyssey team are working on a 3D Donkey Kong game. So this was more than 4 years ago, and DK Vine had updated on what may be going on with this project. Development of the new Donkey Kong game purportedly began around 2017 or 2018 when Nintendo decided to bring Donkey Kong back internally for the first time since Nintendo EAD's Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, although Jungle Beat was more of a stopgap than a permanent status quo. I've been led to believe that this is a new EPD team that has formed from other teams specifically for the purpose of creating Donkey Kong games. And so I think this is interesting to bring up because we also got a rumor from Nash Riedel recently where he talked about who might be working on Donkey Kong Bonanza. And he mentioned that it wasn't necessarily just the main Mario team, but something else. And it was talked about how Monolith Soft always offers support work, but I feel there's a bit of an implication of something else there. And really, I think this makes the most sense because also no way the 3D Mario team, who hasn't put out a game since 2017, has only been working on Donkey Kong Bonanza the last 8 years. And if that is the case, then that would mean that 3D Mario is very far off, which has never happened before for the beginning of a new Nintendo console generation. I think they would want to make sure that 3D Mario is available early on. What makes the most sense is either A, the Odyssey team has been working on 2 projects at once over these last 8 years, which is conceivable because it's 8 years. That is enough time to make 2 huge games. Or 2, some of the Odyssey team formed a new team internally at Nintendo to work on Donkey Kong, perhaps the new Donkey Kong team. And what's interesting about this is that we did hear that Yoshiaki Koizumi, the producer for Super Mario Odyssey, was actually at one of the press events showcasing Donkey Kong Bonanza. He was paying attention to people's reaction of the game. And while I find all this fascinating, I bring it all up because I think it highlights that there is a decent chance here that it's not just Donkey Kong Bonanza that's been worked on over all this time, and 3D Mario likely is not that far off either. Historically, 3D Mario is always available fairly early on into a system's life cycle. If not by the first holiday of the console, definitely by the second holiday. So yes, I absolutely expect that 3D Mario, if it's not coming out this year, is definitely coming out next year, and I'm actually leaning next year at this point because I do think Bonanza, it being a 3D platformer, and seemingly at least taking some elements from the Mario Odyssey project, will be just the focus of this year from those teams, and next year they'll have 3D Mario. But they could potentially tease 3D Mario in this next Direct. That is a game similar to Zelda that could inspire a lot of confidence in the future of the console and get people invested early on so they're buying the console early on. So everything I'm saying here isn't necessarily a prediction except maybe Luigi's Mansion 4, but I talk about all these things in terms of expectations here because Nintendo definitely has a few options in terms of showcasing a big Megaton during this next Nintendo Direct. I think it's going to be a very important presentation. I mean, every sort of big general Direct during this period of time is important because it's the very beginning of the generation. If there's a time for Nintendo to go all out, this is the time. And to clarify on going all out, because I think, we look at the Switch 2 Direct, and while I think it was exciting, there's definitely more they could have showed. I mean going all out in terms of making sure they show us everything that they need to show off in this first year. In other words, I'm expecting a Direct presentation that's about as good as the one we just got in April. And perhaps actually what's interesting about this upcoming one is that now that the system has been shown off and they've already gone through all the time of talking about the hardware itself, they can spend more time on the games. But also, of course, they're not going to have another hour-long Direct. It's probably going to be closer to around 40-ish minutes, but that's still a lot of time to focus on a lot of new game announcements for this new generation. But what do you all think? What do you make of the potential Megaton announcements we could see in this Direct that's now rumored to be happening a little bit sooner than what a lot of us have been expecting? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.